Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June edition, the June 2023 edition of Space Talks with the UChicago Space Network. Space Network is an impressive community of alumni, scientists, entrepreneurs in the maroon community who are in the space sector. So this is a series where we get to talk with industry experts who are on the vanguard of a truly multidisciplinary field. So welcome, thank you for joining us today. Before I turn things over to our Space Network president, Dave Fisher, I want to congratulate him on joining the UChicago Alumni Board. We're very happy to have him as he's been a longtime leader in community engagement at the University of Chicago. So congratulations, Dave. Thank you so much for everything that you do for the University of Chicago alumni community. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that you can keep up with the UChicago Space Network by subscribing to its monthly newsletter. You can also find more programs with UChicago alumni and friends at alumniandfriends.uchicago.edu. And you can learn more about what we're doing in the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics at the University of Chicago at the links that I'm sending in the chat. I'm Josh Levitt. I am specialist in alumni engagement and also affiliated with the Physical Sciences Division at the University of Chicago, which includes Astronomy and Astrophysics, the Kavli Institute for Cosmological Physics, and such alumni communities as these. So I'm happy to be here in partnership with the alumni engagement team. Dave, over to you.
Hey, Josh, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you for the congratulations too. I'm really looking forward to doing even more with the University of Chicago. Welcome to the June 2023 University of Chicago Space Network Space Talk. If you do follow our Space Talks, you'll notice that we didn't have one in May, and we had a really good reason for it, which was that we were overwhelmed by so many positive things that we were able to do in person on campus during alumni weekend. So we had a great time presenting at an event that the Physical Sciences Division hosted at the Adler Planetarium, as well as having a great opportunity to meet up with a lot of current students and alumni to talk about the Space Network in where else but the beer tent at the University of Chicago, as well as an opportunity that the Career Services Office sponsored to speak to graduating fourth years about opportunities in the field of space. So as Josh said, the University of Chicago Space Network, we're a community, we're an alumni community. Our purpose is to connect alumni, current students, and others interested in space, both as a business and a scientific endeavor, to advance networking and career advancement, career guidance, business development, mentoring, funding, and technology collaboration. We have a pretty even split in our space talks between astrophysics-oriented talks and business-oriented talks. Today's talk is an entrepreneurial talk. And before I hand it over to our esteemed MC of these space talks, Gaurav Kumar, I do just want to take a moment to recognize Shannon Tully, who has joined us as our VP of Events on the University of Chicago Space Network Board. Welcome, Shannon. And just a personal connection, I love to point out, Shannon and I have graduated almost 40 years apart from each other, and yet we had the same undergraduate advisor, Al Harper, who has just made such an impact across the University of Chicago for many, many years. With that, I'll be quiet and turn this over to the main event. So Gaurav, over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Dave. And it was a pleasure to see you and others last month at the alumni weekend in the beer tent. And we had a fabulous event, a lot of souvenirs of UCSN. So those who could not join us this year, please join us next year and be informed by signing up to our newsletter and connecting with us on LinkedIn. I'm Gaurav Kumar. As Dave mentioned, I'm the VP of Communication for University of Chicago Space Network. And today we have the pleasure of having Ernie Chung as a speaker for this month's Space Talk. Ernie is a managing director at FTI Consulting, which is one of the well-known advisory and consulting firms globally. And he has over 25 years of consulting and advisory experience across different industries, mainly aerospace, defense, and also media and telecom. Ernie has been an entrepreneur himself, and we will talk about that. He lives in Denver, Colorado, and he has also served for Senator Feinstein. And for the people in the audience who either have served or are thinking about serving, we can get some good advice from Ernie. Ernie has a bachelor's in political science from University of Santa Barbara, and he has a master's in an MBA from Leeds School of Business. Welcome, Ernie, and thanks for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gaurav, for the introduction. Super excited to be here. Very much appreciate the opportunity to join the chat with the University of Chicago Space Network. So thanks.
Welcome, Ernie. And what we are going to do is that we are going to spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes each on 4 segments. The first one will be the introduction and background of Ernie. Then we'll get into the opportunities and risks in the space industry. And then we'll move on to guidance and advice from Ernie around professional development as well as general life to the audience. And at the end, we will have around 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. Please type in your Q&A in the chat, or you can also come off mute and ask your question towards the end of the session. So Ernie, let's get started. And why don't you tell a bit about your background, some of the key decisions you have made in your professional life, and how have you reached where have you reached today?
Great. Awesome. Thank you. So let's maybe just start from the beginning. It's probably easier to do this chronologically than trying to work backwards. So as Gaurav said, I have a degree in political science, international relations from UCSB, University of California at Santa Barbara. Graduated in 1997, so dating myself here. And having a political science degree at Santa Barbara at the time, and I was trying to stay in Santa Barbara. I mean, you can't really fault me for trying to do that, for people that, know Santa Barbara, it was really not a lot of options. And so I ended up going to Washington, D.C. and had an opportunity to work for Senator Feinstein, worked for her for a little over 2 years. And then transitioned over to management consulting with a firm called Booz Allen Hamilton. And so at Booz Allen, I focused on aerospace and defense, and that, aerospace has always been sort of within, my blood, within my DNA. And my grandfather was a pilot. He was in the airline industry for, a very long time. So I grew up sort of around, hardware, military hardware, aerospace hardware, and that was sort of my deep passion for aerospace and defense. Very fortunately, I was able to work on a space program in Rome, Italy in 2004. And the program was called Cosmos SkyMed. I don't know if the folks on the call or in the audience are familiar with it, but it was one of the first synthetic aperture radar constellations, operational synthetic aperture radar constellations in the industry. And fascinating time. I worked in Rome for 7 months, and it sort of, introduced me to space, but also a love of Italy. So, so I was with Booz Allen until 2007. At that point, this is right, sort of, when we, entered the, sort of the financial times, the financial market implosion back in 2007, 2008. I thought that, hey, I'm a consultant. I'm a pretty smart guy, I think. I'm going to try my hand at this entrepreneurial stuff. And so I ended up in Boulder, Colorado, because Boulder was a small community, but extremely entrepreneurial. So I thought, hey, why don't I go find a program where I can plug myself into the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem, because that would absolutely present a lot of opportunities to then apply my business chops, both in terms of practical knowledge, having worked in consulting, aerospace consulting, but as well as the tools that I was getting from my MBA program. And that's essentially what the plan was. Then that's what I did. So in 2007, came to CU Boulder, did my MBA, and then sort of started my foray into entrepreneurship. So I had my own consulting company that was doing business plans and doing a business advisory, operational advisory. I was able to license a technology out from the technology transfer office in CU Boulder that focused on thermal management. It was a product called Flexible Thermal Ground Plane. So I had a company called Coleman Technologies. We applied, for a number of SBIR grants. And ran it for a little while. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a lot of traction. I mean, the cost to actually get something like that off the ground was beyond what I had planned, and also the time commitment was also much larger and significant than I had available to me. And so did a number of entrepreneurial projects, provided consulting services to companies like Microsoft. And then, shifted gears towards doing startups in home automation and, home IoT, which also then has some energy efficiency, demand response type of applications as well. So those sort of, joined. So I have some background in IoT platforms. And so it was fine. And then my kids came in December of 2012. So I've got boy-girl twins. They're 10. And got very busy, right? And so at that particular point in time, I had to sort of pivot away from, doing things that are much more sort of risky, open-ended, towards, going back and having a much more sort of stable, predictable career where, so I was able to provide for my family and what have you. So at that point in time, I joined, so in 2014, I joined a company called Alex Partners, which specializes in turnaround restructuring, but also focusing on aerospace and defense. So my expertise there was still really focused on space, because that's where my passion is. And then that brought me to, right around the COVID time. And, just because of the way that, the construct of consulting really evolved, that it was no longer sort of on site. And for me, I very much, thrive off of interactions with people. And so I was looking to make a switch, potentially in consulting, but I was also looking at space industry as well. And this opportunity with FTI Consulting came up, and FTI has an office in Denver. I said, oh, great. So instead of me sort of working remote and having these calls on Teams and Zoom or what have you, I can actually physically be here in person. And so that's what I did. I joined FTI Consulting in February of 2022, and I've been there ever since. So I am the custodian of FTI's space practice. My mandate at FTI is to really sort of bring the best of the capabilities of the firm to the space market, and vice versa. And sort of talking to a lot of companies in space and trying to understand sort of what some of their specific needs are, and see how we can sort of help companies, clients get from A to B. So that sort of brings up to where we are today.
Yeah, that's very impressive. And can you talk a bit more about your work at FTI, and what exactly you do, and how FTI Consulting is participating in the space industry today?
Yeah, okay. So FTI is, I didn't know much about FTI at first, other than the fact that I was losing a number of pursuits and deals, large financial transactions in restructuring and bankruptcy to FTI when I was at my previous firm. So that really sort of put them on the radar. And through conversations with, sort of the founders of the space practice at FTI, I've discovered that, they've been doing space. FTI has been doing space for over 30 years. The guru who hired me was the original auditor for Skybridge, which was the original license holder for OneWeb. So that just goes to show how long this capability has existed within FTI. And so what do we do at FTI? I mean, it's kind of an interesting a value proposition, which I think very, very few firms have the ability to deliver. So my background is really turning around distressed programs, operational improvement, supply chain transformations, right? So I do a lot of sort of hardware programmatic related kind of things. FTI's capabilities are much broader than that. So it's not just, hey, let's do cost out, right? It's FTI's through our sister company, Delta Partners, we do strategy. So we've done a lot of strategy for satellite operators, both in terms of comm, but also for Earth observation. We do operational turnarounds. This is my sort of, bread and butter. We also do financial restructuring. So FTI was the financial advisor in bankruptcy cases like Speedcast, like OneWeb, like Intelsat. They were on Intelsat. We're currently active with Virgin Orbit. And so pretty much any one of the large space transactions, financial transactions that sort of taken place over the last, 20 years, FTI has been a part of it. And lastly, what's also really, really fascinating that most, I would say, advisory firms don't offer is that we actually have an advocacy group in DC that we do federal government lobbying advocacy. So that is part of our strategic communications practice. So not only do we have the ability to sort of do early on strategy, we can do operational related type of activities. We help put business plans together, doing valuation type of work, to raise money for our clients. But we also are able to, do advocacy work from I would say information dissemination, but also sort of coaching and guiding people who are, potentially non-sophisticated audience that really don't understand sort of the nuances of the industry and sort of help them become, much more well-versed in terms of what some of the challenges of what the needs of the industry are. So it's really sort of what I call it the four-leaf clover. You have the strategy part, you have the financial part, you have the operational part, and then you have the advocacy, strategic communication aspect of it. So that's what really sort of makes this capability very, very unique. And for me, I'm not the leader of the practice. Like I said, I'm just the custodian because, my mandate is to really sort of bring all these different pieces from across the firm to the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. And, Ernie, I mean, looking at your experience, which touches working for a senator, a lot of financial advisory, a lot of business advisory and entrepreneurship, I think you are very well suited to, to play that role of custodian, as you call it, in FTI.
It's the perfect role for a person with ADD, right? Hey, you want to talk about spectrum valuation? We can talk about that. Oh, you want to talk about EAR, ITAR compliance, and parts classification? I could talk about that too, right? You want to talk about bankruptcy?
Right.
Buying distressed asset? I could talk about that. So there's never sort of a dull moment in my work, which is what keeps me going. This is why, and I love the industry. I love the challenges associated with all the different facets of space businesses. So yeah,
that's great, Ernie. And one of the things I wanted to mention is that you do have the advisor to the stars in your LinkedIn profile. I would add to that, advisor to the stars and the fallen stars, given all the bankruptcy and the difficult restructurings which you have also advised on. And we'll get into that now, moving into the section 2, which is more around the industry and the risks and opportunities. You were in Italy last week after 16 years, right? When you were last there. Well, you might have been.
Well, I've been there a number of times in between,
right,
but yes,
right.
Yeah.
But compared to, because you mentioned that you loved Italy the first time you were there, and I'm sure a lot has changed, but more has changed in the space industry during that time frame. Do you want to talk a bit about, your reflection on the last 25 years you have seen the industry evolving, and what kind of risks and opportunities which you actually see in this industry going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just go back to the time of when I first worked on the program Cosmos SkyMed, right? It was originally intended as a civil program that was sponsored by the Italian space agency ASI, and then the Italian MOD then came on board and said, "Hey, this is an interesting capability. We would like to sort of get on board of this as well." And so when you have new technologies, plural, because synthetic aperture radar was not sort of a household concept at the point, right, as where it is today, there was the challenge with the development of the technology. But then when you add additional complexity of customer requirements, such as having a military use application on top of a civil platform, right, the customer diversity and the needs requirement of the platform evolves, right? So you no longer have to, it's no longer just like, hey, make the data secure as possible. It's then you have to have XBAN, you have to have crypto units, you have to have, additional requirements that are levied on top of the platform that make the platform exponentially more expensive. Part of the reason why I was brought in was because the program was essentially 3 years behind schedule, and the customers were very frustrated and they wanted to cancel the program. And so I had gone in there and put in a performance-based, management system. We call it earned value management, for the initiated, and that level of transparency enabled greater confidence in the customer, both ASI as well as the Italian MOD, that hey, these guys actually know what they're talking about, what they're doing. So as a result of that transparency, they rewarded my client, a fourth spacecraft. So the program went from roughly about 700 million euros to a little over 1.1 billion euros. Now, it's nice you can do that, because back at that time, it was very much an institutional market that are looking for key technological capabilities to deploy. And so there is the benefit of a customer that is patient, that is not directly looking for profit, right? And they want to ensure that the vendor who's doing this type of work survives, right? Fast forward to where we are today. So, I mean, this is not news to anybody, here on this talk or whatnot, but the cost of launch has literally sort of decreased by the order of magnitude, right? So, I mean, you can literally get stuff to LEO in less than $5,000 per kilogram. And so because of that cost of launch towards low Earth orbit, it has opened up significantly more numbers of business cases where, hey, you don't actually have to fly really rad hard parts, radiation hardened parts. You can essentially even consider terrestrial components. You can launch, constellations, right? Where you then have low cost components, but having the ability to then have global coverage at a very low cost. And so as a result of that, you have this proliferation of commercial enterprises that are trying to I don't want to say reinvent the wheel, but deliver capabilities that we had 20 years ago, cheaper, faster, superior, evolving the innovation so that capabilities are actually coming online much, much, much faster than previously 20 years ago. And so because of that, and because we have this competition, a proliferation of access to LEO, there's a lot more opportunities for both the institutional customer, but also for commercial enterprises that want to serve that institutional market or even broader commercial market. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of things that we're seeing, that has really sort of, transformed the paradigm of the space market over the last, 5 to 8 years.
Right. And Ernie, 2 quick questions on that. The first is, do you expect the cost, I don't know to what extent you can talk about it, but do you expect the cost curves to continue declining for launch? And do you think the financial challenges which the industry has seen is more driven by the customer changing from a government to private profit-making entities?
That's a great question. And the answer to your first question is absolutely yes. I mean, look at the unit economics of Starship, right? I mean, Elon has said, look, you know what, the unit economics of Starship, of Starlink Gen 1 is not great, but so we really need Gen 2, but we really need Starship to make the unit economics of Gen 2 Starlink attractive. And so as a heavy launch vehicle, you have the ability to carry a lot more uplift mass, and therefore your unit economics of dollars per kilogram improves significantly, right? And so tying back to your second question is that, do I see trouble with sort of some of the other entrants in the marketplace? The answer is yes, right? Because at the end of the day, when people talk about flexibilities in launch, I think that's fine because, hey, I want to go to 60-degree inclination. I want to be at 800 kilometers. I mean, just sort of really oddball type of orbits or certain planes that you really don't have a whole lot of demand, and so therefore you need to have a small launcher with the capability to deliver for a specific requirement, right? That said, right, when you have launchers that have unit economics at 5,000 kilograms and smaller launchers unit economics are at $50,000 per kilogram, it's the small assets, right, that, hey, we paid $30,000 for this CubeSat. I am not going to pay $50,000 to launch this CubeSat, right into some esoteric orbit that you're just not. And so what's happening is that the smaller launchers are evolving because they see that, hey, you know what, we're not competitive. We can't compete against the likes of Falcon 9 or Starship. So therefore, we have to tack and go with a larger launcher, right? And so what happens is that demand of sort of customized services, launch on demand and going to specific orbits, not having to wait and deal with sort of rideshare issues and stuff. It's the analogy of the business jets, of the private jets. How many people can afford to go charter a business jet to go do what it is that they want to go do, right? So that audience have that specific need, but they don't have the financial wherewithal to pay for that.
Right. I don't know about, so, in a private jet, the outcome is a unique experience, which is very customized and special with maybe smaller group of people. Is that the case here? So will these smaller launching companies give something, they are all putting things in the space. So what is, it essentially, SpaceX is crowding out the market, and the competition could come down as well. It's already very challenging these days.
I think you're absolutely spot on. I think that the interesting thing is that if you look at the space market, right? I'm going to take us off on a tangent real quick, okay? But there's a point here. Space is like Las Vegas. It's just a place. What are you doing in space? What is the end application of you being there? What purpose does it serve, right? In Las Vegas, you have hotels, you have restaurants, you have shows, you have other stuff there, right? What are you doing with it, right? It's merely a means to an end, exploration notwithstanding, okay? So when we talk about space, we're really talking about 22 unique and distinct sub-segments there. You have customers, commercial, civil, defense, intelligence community. And then you have all these applications of comms, of Earth observation, of PNT position, navigation, and timing, and so forth, right? And so within that rubric, you can see that there are customers with very specific and unique requirements. Let's say you talk about defense, right? Now there's a lot of discussions around space situational awareness, right? Maybe they do need a small launcher, right? And if this is really a key capability for an institutional customer, even if it's $49,000 per kilogram, they said, okay, that's fine, right? That's the price tag. That's what it takes to deliver on this capability. But if you're talking about commercial customers, right, that's doing broadband. Your dollar per megabits per second per month, right, matters, and the cost of launching that, the asset, plays into your KPI, your dollars per megabits per second per month, right? So there is pricing sensitivity. So really, when we talk about space, it's not space in its holistic term. Yes, it's just locations like Las Vegas, but very much about what specific application for what customer.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Ernie. And I think that's why there are so many companies and startups coming up in that, providing the services and the menu of options to different customers, rather than, just launch, which is could be more or less commoditized and it's getting cheaper. So yeah, that's great insight, Ernie. The next question, I don't know if you can answer, but can you talk about one of your most exciting transactions you have been engaged in to the extent possible?
Yeah, I can, and this doesn't actually have anything directly to do with space hardware. So one of the most fascinating transactions I have ever encountered in my consulting career, 23 years consulting career, was Intelsat's bankruptcy. Okay, you're probably thinking, well, how is that interesting? Well, fundamentally, Intelsat's bankruptcy was not because they were running out of cash to go service their debt. It's because they wanted to find ways to then monetize the C-band, right? So auction 107, FCC ran an auction for 5G spectrum, auction 107, which raised $81.2 billion of proceeds for the US taxpayers, right? Because the satellite operator said, hey, you know what? We have this asset, this real estate of spectrum that we're not really using. We can actually clean this stuff up, put it in sort of a much smaller space, and then sell this spectrum that we're no longer using, right? And for that, they received this, this incentive payments for, getting off the spectrum. And not only that, they had all of their assets fundamentally paid for the migration. And so they themselves, as a company, did not have the means and the wherewithal to be able to finance that transition. But through this construct of filing for bankruptcy, they came out much better financially on the other side of it. And so it wasn't, so when we sort of look at these sort of space transactions, there is so much more than just, here's the business at face value, right? Because there's so many different aspects that play into a value of a space operator, space company, namely spectrum, right? So, before sort of this Intelsat bankruptcy, case, and before sort of the C-band auctions and whatnot, it was, from a space practitioner standpoint, it was like, okay, it's, spectrum is there, you need spectrum to operate. But what you don't fully appreciate, at least for me, I didn't fully appreciate it, was that how much additional value could potentially be in the company based off of the real estate that they actually have.
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably one of the most fascinating and most notable transactions I've ever been involved with.
Yeah, that's sounds very interesting and complicated. I'm sure, there must be so many interlinked complexities, with the government, with the creditors, with the shareholders, with the customers, with the suppliers, and being in the middle of that. And I'm sure some people lost money, at least at that time, and managing all of that must have been very hard.
Not only that, it's the first time I've ever come across a bankrupt company making a $400 million acquisition right in the middle of their bankruptcy. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. And we'll switch now to the third section, which is the guidance and advice to the audience. And sometimes we do have audience, I would say, who are students, who are entrepreneurs or startup founders, and some of them are students in the college, some of them are students in the business school. We also have a lot of alums who are our audience. Can you, given how you have written so many business plans and defended it in front of funders, not only private funders but also government funders, what are the kind of advice and guidance you have for the entrepreneurs who are working on business plans to be successful?
Yeah, great question. I think the single most important takeaway that I have for the audience is really sort of back to first principles of knowing your customers and understanding their problem and what problem you're solving for them. And so with that understanding, what generally has not gone very well are business plans that are based on generic notion to say, hey, we think that there is a problem here. We're going to raise money and we're going to solve that problem, right? But those type of business cases are generic. It's not, hey, I have an understanding that Gaurav has a problem with problem X, and he has a recurring problem X, that he's continuously trying to pull his hair out, right? I have a solution that can solve problem X for Gaurav. Right. And I know that he's not the only person that has this problem. Here are all these different additional customers, right, that have this particular issue. And so the issue identification has to be at the micro level, a very, very specific micro level that you can put your finger on, right? Mm-hmm. Because here's an example of, talking about space business cases, these, LEO, comms, data, broadband connectivity business cases. Say, hey, you know what, we're going to provide internet in sub-Saharan Africa, right? At what price point? Who specifically has this problem? Do they have the ability to pay, right? What are they going to use this for, right? And so once you start racking and stacking things at the micro level, right, then you will really have a better picture as to what the true demand of this particular product that you're trying to provide, or what the economic value of the problem really is. Mm-hmm. Those are business cases that resonate really well with investors because they can do their due diligence and talk to the people that actually have problem X and say, oh yeah, it's real, right? So they're willing to fund the companies that can provide the solutions to problem X. So that's really sort of my advice. At the end of the day, it's really customer intimacy. It's not like, hey, I have this capability, I have this cool technology, hey, we can solve all these problems, world hunger and what have you. It's getting down into names of people. Where do they live? What is their ability to pay for this product, right? And so this is why institutional markets are very attractive, because you can pinpoint a specific agency with certain mandate to provide certain capabilities, and you know what the budgets are, right? You can say, oh, they have that money, right, to go solve this problem. Now, of course, there's stuff in the intelligence community, the black budget, that we don't talk about, but that also stems from, hey, if you're already sort of within that, you have the ticket to go to go backstage, you can then talk to truly the musicians who are playing to say, hey, what's going on here, right?
And Ernie, that is a very wise advice. When you say institutional, you are only referring to government, or you are also thinking someone else?
Mostly referencing government customers, but also NGOs, with certain mandates and whatnot. I mean, obviously, there are climate mandates, from the UN, with COP28 coming up. So, there are absolutely opportunities for sort of broader, broader non-specific nation states that is looking for certain capabilities to, either do monitoring or do compliance or, actually do mitigation of certain issues that we have globally.
Yeah, I was at the beer tent during the alumni weekend. I met with Dave. We met Jesse Hoogs, who's a commercial director at Orbital Sidekick, and they have this company technology. They just launched their third satellite on the space
Transporter. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And what they are doing is measuring methane, and they can also measure hydrogen, for example,
Yep.
in future using hyperspectral analysis. And so to your point, yeah, it's a very specific problem which specific customers have, which they can solve, and they can today solve it maybe over a smaller area, but in future they can solve it over the entire world, thanks to the low cost of launch vehicles.
Precisely.
And, yeah, that's great, Ernie. And what other advice you would give to the younger crowd, or not, I don't mean younger in terms of age, but younger in terms of exploring their lives, their professional careers. What advice would you give to structure a career and be successful in a professional career?
Yeah, I think one of the key things that I've always sort of told some of the younger folks, people that are, venturing into the professional world, is top cover. It's really sort of mentorship and, having somebody who is looking out for you, who has your best interest in mind, and that not, to help you develop, to help you build the skill sets, to help give you the opportunities, right? To sort of build you up when things, are sort of difficult, but also give you sort of a taste of reality, a dose of reality, to say, look, what you're, looking for is, potentially not realistic, right? You may not come off very popular, for being a mentor that's telling somebody, says, hey, that's not a good idea, because nobody likes being told no, and that's a bad idea. But I think that this is not just even for people venturing out into early stage career, but even so for, sort of very senior, professionals, right? Because when you have a mentor, a coach, somebody who you trust, it could be sort of within your organization, it could be elsewhere, what have you, it sort of gives you a lot more sense of security that you're not out there on your own by yourself. Mm-hmm. So having top cover, having mentorship is probably the single most important advice that I would suggest to people. So which means that you have to, as an individual, be very discerning and talk to a lot of people to say, hey, are these the people that I want to be around, right? Do I want this person to be my mentor? So, I've been very fortunate. I had a very good mentor, in my 23 years career.
Thanks, Ernie. And the other thing, which is very clear from your success, maybe you're too modest about it, is finding something which you are really good at and unique in, and which overlaps with all the experience. Like in your case, what you're doing, as we discussed, is bringing most of your strengths together at one place. We do have an audience question from Ishai. I was wondering if you can come off mute, or I can read the question.
I'm not sure whether my audio is working.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. I just had a question on cybersecurity. Does FTI have any products or advice for the individual consumer?
Yeah, actually, FTI has a huge cybersecurity practice based in DC. I mean, we have, people that, are formerly, associate directors and directors at the FBI. So, this is something that is, a critical capability. I mean, people talk about finance, people about HR, people talk about IT, but really at the end of the day, cybersecurity is really sort of at the convergence of everything, right? And so this is something that, we always bring up with our clients. Sometimes they don't like talking about it. Other times it's like, hey, here's an afterthought. But the way that we sort of have conversations with the clients are that, look, what, you either don't focus on this today because it doesn't actually have any immediate tangible benefits, or that something happens and it's like, that by that time it's too little too late, right? So it's one of these things that even space, non-space, what have you, any sort of technology related type of businesses, cybersecurity should and needs to be sort of at the cornerstone of everything that you're doing. So it could be expensive, but I think it's definitely a very important aspect of sort of building a very a business with very solid foundations.
Thanks,
Thank
Ernie. I think she also had, if you have any advice for individual rather than institutional customer.
In what sense?
Well, I was just curious about whether there's a way to verify like somebody's identity, like because the internet is so anonymous, it's easy to fake somebody's, like, I don't know. You could probably just if you have somebody's information, you could probably just pass as that person online. But I don't know if there's any way to, even in a video call or something, like, is there a way to verify somebody's identity?
I think there are probably ways, but I'm certainly not an expert in this particular topic. So I tend to be overly trusting, but perhaps I shouldn't. But good to think about it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. We don't have any other questions, so I'll ask another one I had in the roster, Ernie. So we talked about the cost curve coming down. One of the transformational changes which led to that was the ability to relaunch. That was one of the biggest reasons. Do you think there is anything similar which could happen, or there's an opportunity of something of that kind happening going forward, which will drastically reduce the cost, or it's going to be very incremental, small little decreases going forward?
I mean, I think I don't know if that was a leading question or not, but I mean, if you look at sort of on-orbit services and what have you, life extensions, right? Companies are working on ability to fetch, stuff in graveyard orbits and put it back into use, right? So think about the unit economics or the cost of just, data capacity, right? Mm-hmm. Something that, was had a business case that was based on 15 years, maybe operated for 18, but hey, all the components are still good. Right, we're just out of field, no more station keeping. So hey, let's do station keeping, life extension, right? Let's add another 10 years. Think about the unit economics of something like that, of capacity, right? But then there's also the downstream effect, which is, what does that mean for satellite OEMs? Because their stuff is now lasting a lot longer than what they had originally planned, right? Yep. And then the cost of capacity, right? So that you have incremental capacity that have very low marginal costs, because you're not launching a brand new $500 million spacecraft. You're essentially paying $20 million to extend this existing capability. So yes, and then there are companies that's working on recycling of objects in space and making it into fuel rods, right? I mean, that stuff is remarkable. So I think that reusability for launch is just the tip of the iceberg. It's that, the stars are really the limit, right? It's left up to the imagination of what else can we do?
Yeah, spot on. Thanks, Ernie. I think it was a leading question, and that was a great perspective on, extending the life of the satellites, either by improving them here or taking fuel or other things up there to extend it. Excellent. I see, Josh, you have your hand up, and then we have a question from Shannon. Josh, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Yes. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Not by any means. Thank you so much, Ernie. It's really a pleasure to hear from you. I was wondering, you were talking about how the ways that the space sector, certain paradigms have shifted really as recently as the past 3 to 5 years. So I guess I'm wondering, like, why, I guess to what extent and why do you expect the space industry to flourish and grow in the near future? And then kind of correspondingly, what may be the biggest risk management questions that come with those or may temper those expectations?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, Josh. I think part of the challenge, let's just start with the risk first, and then we sort of get to the opportunities from there. Space is very expensive. Space is not easy, right? It's not like, hey, I can raise $5 million and all of a sudden I have an end product and with a customer base that's generating recurring revenue, right? It's, with very high profile, very recent, type of, of businesses that, sort of didn't take off, right? It's $1 billion+ of investments that, went down the drain, right? So because of that risk, I think investors have historically been very shy, or at least the institutional monies that have the horsepower to be able to bring a space-related concept or product into maturity. So, for example, you want to launch a spacecraft. I mean, this is public, right? Astronomy estimates $350 million to get their first GEO, their micro GEO off the ground, right? But here's the thing: it's not just 350. It's that a lot of the space type of product life cycle maturity stands with just concept. You build the hardware, protoflights, right? PFMs, this stuff works, but then that's just, hey, you've proven that the technology works. I haven't productized it. To make it into a product and have, mission assurance, manufacturing assurance, manufacturing engineering, industrial engineering, the whole sort of production facility, production system, right, is not $350 million. It's another 350 plus another 350 plus another 350, right? So when it's all said and done, to actually have a mature product, it's literally a lot of 9 plus zeros behind it.
Right, exactly.
And so when you have early stage funds that have the wherewithal to fund $5 million, $10 million, that is a very, very long way to go to get the number where they need to essentially have the fund realizes the sort of the gains and the profit that the fund was originally targeting, right? And so you literally have an issue with, you don't actually have people that can write the second and the third check, right? Because the first check is really hard to come in, because they know that, hey, you know what, we're not the second check, third check, we don't know, probably not, right? So because of that, there has historically been reservations about financing and funding hardware-centric startups. That's sort of where we are today. And that's sort of the challenge right now. And so how do you solve that, right? So that's the opportunity part. It's that when you have institutional customers, right, that says, hey, I have that specific need. I don't need this thing to be at 5,000 kilograms, right? I'm happy to pay $49,000 per kilogram, because this is a capability that's critical to me. So once you start having a customer that you have an intimacy with, right? You know them, you know their budgets, you know what they're financing, you then have somewhat of a predictable revenue stream, right? I mean, these large aerospace and defense companies, these large programs, right? 30, 40, 50-year life cycles, then you know that there's revenue coming in. So as a financier, I'm happy to sign, to provide senior secure loans, right? 80% of what it is you need, because I know you're going to be able to service this, as opposed to having to go with traditional equity route, which is generally very expensive.
Right. That makes sense.
Hopefully that answered your question.
It does. It does. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. Shannon, do you want to go off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I was interested in hearing more about the sort of lobbying front with governments. What's the barriers and the problems that you see with trying to, get influence governments to do certain policies, or what policies are you trying to help the government see the light on?
Yeah, I mean, because if you look at historical space, those are occupied by, I would say, Fortune 100 companies that have enormous amount of lobbying budgets. Okay, I'm not going to name names, but traditional large A&D companies, right? That have revenues in the lines of $50 billion. And so for them, to essentially continue and advocate their capabilities in their program is literally a drop in the bucket, right? A huge lobbying, huge DC presence. And so what happens is then lawmakers, as well as customers, see those entities as the more or less the trusted, quote unquote, trusted supplier, right? It's that if you continue to go to your local grocery store, Kroger's or what have you, right? You're going to go to Kroger's. You're not going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to try this random grocery store that just popped up that have, like a third of what it is that I'm looking for, right? You're not going to do that. You're just not, right? And so when you have advocacy in Capitol Hill and helping people become aware that, oh, hey, this new small grocery store is locally sourced material. It's all organic. It's a mom and pop store, right? Their intent is to really sort of promote the local agricultural ecosystem. So we eat locally. You don't have the transportation network. It's sort of promoting health and what have you, right? So the advocacy work and the education work is really sort of information, not like, hey, I want to influence you to spend that dollar on me, right? Because we don't do, that's not how things are done. It's that you write certain things within appropriations and help sort of members understand, look, there are other options out there, in their own congressional district that, hey, you know what, there's small companies that are doing remarkable things, but because they're really small, you don't know what it is that they can do. You're going to continue to go back to Kroger's, right? Nothing against Kroger's. I shop at King Soopers, which is Kroger's. So,
yeah. So Ernie, essentially, increasing competitiveness in the industry across the value chain, I think, would be one of the priorities, right?
yes.
Are you okay to overrun by?
Yeah.
We have another interesting question. Sean, do you want to go off mute and ask the question?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, so this is really great session. Thank you very much. I'm sort of less U of C alum, but a little bit more mid-career, working for a defense contractor that competes with Booz Allen. And so I was very interested in what you were saying earlier around turning around troubled programs. Most of the work I do is in what we call the cost plus area, where the government pays for everything and you only get to charge a fee on top of it, versus a lot of what I would figure would be failing programs of people going out of business, which would be more fixed price work, where if you don't do it right, you actually do, you lost all the money that you said you were going to get. So I wonder, have you ever worked with what I would call a traditional like cost plus program to turn it around? And if you haven't, do you think the government would benefit more from having more fixed price work where there's a potential to fail, rather than just having big companies that sort of get paid regardless of whether they deliver well or not? Over.
Yeah, Sean, that's an excellent question. People have devoted entire careers trying to figure out what exactly is appropriate for the type of work, right? So yes, I've absolutely worked in cost plus environments. those development programs are generally what comes up on GAO's list, right? Nunn McCurdy, right? I believe that's the reference that, certain programs that are over a certain, amount of threshold, gets reported and, has to have recurring sort of, IG audits and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, those generally are what, those are the stories that are prompting governments to shift towards more fixed price type of contracts in contexts and applications that may not be appropriate for fixed price.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a broader adoption and proliferation of fixed price contracts. And so it forces contractors to have to accept those terms, right, if they want to play. But there are large defense contractors that have gone out and said, look, you know what? Until you tell me what exactly you're looking for, right? I'm not going to do a fixed price contract, because I'm not going to sort of serve you a cheeseburger and all of a sudden you come back and say, hey, where's my steak dinner? That's what I thought I was, right? And so it really sort of is fit for purpose of what is the context? What are you trying to get out of it? Is it a technology? Is it a capability? Is it actually a widget, right? A product? And then from that, we can then determine what is the most appropriate type of vehicles we're going to use to go buy this thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. It seems to me that when you know what the price is to get something up on launch, that's the first thing that could help with moving to fixed price work for some of these very large procurements. But,
Yeah.
it is exactly about being, fit for purpose.
But, I mean, we sort of all know this, sort of being practitioners within this domain, that, right, space change is a fact. It's a matter of fact, right? Something always pops up, right? And so while there are programs that are a bit under fixed price, there are very sophisticated contractors that have remarkable world-class contract management capabilities that do the engineering change notices to get things changed. Oh, you want that gray? Well, we bid that as black. So now it's going to be another. Here's the change notice, right? Pay me for it.
Yes. Guilty as charged. Thank you.
Absolutely, great question.
Thanks, Sean, for the question, and thanks a lot, Ernie, for your time, taking time away from your family, coming back from holidays, and speaking with us and trying to make time for us to discuss the items while on holidays. So really appreciate it. I'm sure there are more topics we can chat about, and we'll have you back again, hopefully, on the space talks sometime soon, and we can discuss some more topics in detail. So thanks a lot.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm absolutely honored.
And passing it on to Josh to close us out.
Sure thing. I just want to express my appreciation to you, Ernie, and for everyone tuning in. Gaurav flew in to London today and then went straight to the hotel and then tuned in to facilitate this conversation. He is so I just want to express my appreciation to you, Gaurav, because I know how much you care about bringing voices like Ernie's to our Maroon community. And I want to thank everyone who has tuned in for joining us. Today, mergers and acquisitions met astronomy and astrophysics, which in turn met entrepreneurship and career development, as we heard from FTI Consulting's Ernie Chung and BP's Gaurav Kumar. One of the many advantages of engaging with the UChicago Space Network is this opportunity to gain insider insights from industry leaders. So please keep in touch, and we hope to see you in the future.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.